This particular session is around the nonprofit KM journey to success, lessons and learnings from our experts up here today. So I'd like to just briefly introduce Dr. Tom Sommerfeld, who is the former Chief Research Officer at Feeding America, where he led the development and execution of their strategic research agenda. And then also joining Tom is Sarah Duane, a consultant with Enterprise Knowledge LLC, where she specializes in facilitation, design, strategy, and implementation of knowledge and data management solutions. I'm going to pass it over to you.
Great. Thank you so much. Wonderful. All right. I'm a little short, so I might need to pull this down a little bit here. Can you all hear me okay? Okay, wonderful. Well, it's so nice to see you all here. Thank you for joining us. Tom and I are really looking forward to this session and being able to dive into the approach and the kind of success of KM transformations, specifically at nonprofit organizations, but this approach and the lessons that we learned through this process, I think really can extend and apply to a wide variety of organizations from nonprofits to beyond in different industries. So I'm hoping that a lot of what we discussed today applies to you in some way or another at your various organizations and in your various roles, and that there's ability to take this beyond just that nonprofit space too. So with that being said, what we'll go into today, we'll first start talking about some of the unique and kind of specific knowledge management related challenges that Feeding America is facing, has faced, and what we're doing in terms of being able to address these challenges through a roadmap, a KM-specific roadmap based on Feeding America's strategic priorities. So we'll dive into what those look like, and specifically how we can describe and talk about the value of KM, or the ROI of KM for an organization in the nonprofit space. And it's, the way you do that is a little bit different for a nonprofit than you would do for your typical kind of commercial organization. So we'll dive into that as well. With that being said, I know we were introduced a little bit before this, but just to kind of give you a little bit more detail as to who Tom and I are. My name is Sarah Duane. I work for Enterprise Knowledge. So we're the world's largest KM consultancy, and so KM strategies are really our bread and butter. We do this quite often with organizations such as Feeding America, but in other industries as well too. So I myself, I'm a consultant and a project manager, and have had years of experience doing KM strategies for organizations in the federal space, nonprofit space, construction, real estate, and the like. So looking forward to sharing those experiences, specifically in the realm of Feeding America, but beyond that as well too. Do you want to briefly introduce yourself, maybe?
You can stay.
Okay.
We're going to kind of dance back and forth with y'all, just to not bore you, but hopefully you won't get seasick. Tom Sommerfeld's probably less interesting than Feeding America, so let me talk a little bit about Feeding America in case you don't know what that organization is, and I'll give a little bit of background on myself. Feeding America is the largest nonprofit organization in the United States. We serve millions of people meals every year. I think the 2022 count was serving about 45 million people, plus or minus one, I can't remember right now, but 6 billion meals during the height of the pandemic, if you can imagine that. We are in every single county, including Puerto Rico and your very own Washington, D.C. here. So literally, every place that is in the United States and Puerto Rico and D.C., we have services set up and deliver food there. We're the largest rescuer of food in the United States, preventing that food from being turned to waste in landfills and so forth, so doing our part to avert greenhouse gases and other climate changing impact. So it's a large organization. I'll talk a little bit more, and actually Sarah will give some numbers, but phenomenal organization. I'm a former faculty member. I held faculty appointments at Vanderbilt, University of Chicago, Michigan State, did a stint in healthcare, and then Feeding America. I was the chief research officer, as Sandra said, thank you. And they thought, well, KM, that should go right under the research guy. So I had the privilege of leading that effort in conjunction with my partners in crime, Enterprise Knowledge. So I'll turn it back over to Sarah.
Thanks, Tom. Yeah, so throughout the course of this presentation, you can kind of see how Tom and I have complementary experiences and things to say on this topic from our various organizations and areas. So we're looking forward to sharing those together with you from those two perspectives. So I hope you enjoy that. So we'll get started just to kind of give you some context as to how Tom and I and EK and Feeding America worked together. Before we jump into more of the specifics of what we discovered and what we learned. EK and Feeding America worked together over the course, we started working together in 2022 to build out Feeding America's 2-year knowledge management roadmap. And so we started with a very detailed process for discovery and analysis. So we did a mix of what we like to call top-down and bottom-up analysis, where we're doing interviews and focus groups with people across the organization to learn more about their information sharing, their knowledge management habits, and what that looks like across the organization, various departments and various areas. And then doing a complementary approach of doing bottom-up analysis. So what kind of data, knowledge, content exists in Feeding America's various systems within the data, and being able to assess what that looks like gives us that overarching picture of what KM looks like in an organization right now, and then where do we want it to go. And so that where do we want it to go piece is what we did, building out that target state. So ideally, what should KM look like at Feeding America? And in terms of how we get there, that's where that roadmap and those pilots come into play. So we also built out a list, which we'll talk about in a few slides, of specific initiatives or activities that Feeding America could start with to really jumpstart this KM process, as that's an important piece of getting started with a KM journey. And so, as we continue forward and completed this strategy initiative here, EK and Feeding America are continuing to work together and starting to implement some of the pilot initiatives over the next year. So now that you have that kind of context, I want to start off before we go into some of the specific unique KM challenges and what we are planning to do to address those by starting off with some numbers here to maybe kind of help you associate yourselves in these situations, in these types of business challenges, and really kind of show the breadth and extent of both Feeding America's services across the country, as well as the kind of breadth of their environment and what they have access to. So the first number you're seeing on the left, 14 plus. So there's 14 plus systems that Feeding America employees are accessing on that day-to-day basis to do their roles. They're going to various systems and portals to get the answers they need, to communicate with their fellow colleagues, and to be able to communicate to do their day-to-day tasks. And so with that being said, with the kind of large amount of systems there, it really demonstrates that need for strong system governance and the ability to know what system exists for what purpose, and how we can make sure that people have access to the information when they need it, as opposed to being able to kind of search across those various systems without that source of truth. So the next kind of key piece here that I want to point out are the 400 plus content owners. So you can imagine, Feeding America has a lot of really great knowledge, a lot of great experiences, and there's a lot of people who across the country need to be able to share those experiences with best practices, lessons learned across various domains within food sourcing and whatnot. And so there's 400 plus content owners that are able to and do add content to their intranet, and that of course indicates too a need for strong content governance and strong ability to be able to have permissions and things in place to do that appropriately with a strategy in mind. And lastly, I think this is a really good number here, and I think it'll draw some attention to really that breadth of services. Is there are 200 food banks across the country within Feeding America's purview, and then there's about 60,000 partner organizations. So you can really see the strong extent of the reach here, and that's why KM has such a big importance to this organization, because we want to be able to provide the ability for these thousands of partner organizations to provide the services that they need to the people who need it, to get those meals to the people who need it. And so having the access to the information easily accessible and when they need it is key to that mission. And actually, on that note, I'm gonna to kind of give you context of why KM is important, specifically for Feeding America too. Tom's gonna speak a little bit to the ROI and the business impact of KM for Feeding America specifically.
Thank you, Sarah. So I'm gonna go a little bit deeper on this before I jump really quickly and give you a little bit of the underbelly here. So 14 plus does not include all the off to the side little repositories of information that somebody keeps on a spreadsheet or a notepad on their desk or 15 other different kinds of mechanisms. 400 plus is a really telling tale. There's only 450 people that work for the national organization. Okay? And then there's about 10,000 staff members included in the 60,000 community agency and the 200 food banks. So, the quick story, which probably won't be a surprise to y'all, is stuff was everywhere and nowhere. And if you had to find something, you had to know who had it and see if they were there that day and figure it out and exchange emails. And God forbid if they were a remote worker, then you're like trying to, get them in California when you're here in DC, all of those challenges. So being one of the largest nonprofits in the nation, we felt like that was a outgrowth of our roots. We came up gritty and, let's figure out how to recover food and distribute it to those that need it rather than just dumping it in dumpsters and having that go to waste. And then fast forward 40 years, now we've got these organizations, $1 million, multi-million dollars, $100 million across the United States. How do we get more efficient and effective about that? So I wanted to talk a little bit about this. So one of the things that the food banking world prides itself on is, hey, John, thank you for your $10 donation to Feeding America. That's going to help us provide 100 meals. We call it the meal claim. And the way we get to that is by being super efficient and leveraging every single donated dollar, every single donated pound of food right back into the community. So what does that leave off the table is infrastructure and capacity development for things like knowledge management. So you can see where, we want to make sure that we develop capacity internally to do things effectively and efficiently and be high performing for our employees so they feel fulfilled and whatnot. And yet, if we invest internally, we're not looping that back to the community. If that doesn't make sense to you, the second piece of it is that there's this organization called Charity Navigator. Anybody heard of that, Charity Navigator? Yeah, if you don't, you should look it up. If you donate any money whatsoever, it's a great tool to look at. It reports out, it gives stars and percentages and so forth. It basically scores charities on their transparency and their kind of shepherding of the donations that they get. How much of your dollar goes to direct services versus other kinds of things? You'd be surprised at the variability there. So we, as the organization, a nonprofit, it's donors. We have to make sure that those donors feel like those are good investments, they're making those investments. So we can't spend too much money on capacity, so there's always this tight rope walk on that. On the other side, we've got, tens of 10,000 plus folks working in the network, and they're working at sub-market pay. They're highly motivated, highly mission-driven, and they'll work 15 hours a day if you let them. I actually had to tell members of my team to go home now. That was part of my response. Please go home now. It's been 12 hours. You're done. Right? It's okay. We'll get people fed tomorrow as well. So there is that other balance of like, man, I'm taking 30 hours to find out this one piece of information that this person needs in Oregon. Can we share better? Can we distribute better? Can we provide better services so I can spend more time helping people and not chasing down pieces of information and so forth? And then finally, on the food bank outcome piece, thinking through not just historically, our number one outcome measure was pounds distributed. So if you've got a local food bank and you go to their website, you'll see one of their talking points is, oh, we did 300 million pounds of food last year. We distributed that to our hungry neighbors, which is awesome and terrific. But then I think as we move forward, particularly out of COVID, donors became more sophisticated and more involved. When Jeff Bezos provided money and Mackenzie Scott provided money and some of these other kind of high rollers, they wanted to know, what are you doing with that? Where are those dollars going and what impact are they making and how's that working and so forth? And if you've got people not being highly productive, being inefficient, it's hard to go that extra step to document impact. So this was a game changer for us. And I'll kind of dig a little bit deeper on that. So one of the challenges that are unique to nonprofits, I think, borrowing from the for-profit space as well, I think, but they're just different balances and weights on this. So people is priority number one. It's easy for folks in the nonprofit space to get burnt out very quickly. And they're highly driven by the mission and involved in that. So giving them an environment of inefficiency when all they want to do is help and all they want to do is move the mission forward, throttles, just decimates fulfillment, decimates engagement, and leads to burnout quickly. And in any space, turnover is your number one expense. So suddenly we're just churning staff members out because we're burning through them with a lot of inefficiencies and being ineffective with our information. I talked already about internal infrastructure investment versus direct services, but that's a legitimate thing. I was on the executive team, and every executive team meeting, I was like, KM, I know it's not top of your list, but here's why it's so important. We can save X million dollars of donor dollars by being more efficient and productive and so forth. We do have a unique organizational structure, which I'll tell you a little bit about now. Feeding America is a two-tiered federated network. What was that? Two-tier federated network. So we've got the national organization, and which serves 200 food banks that are regionally spaced around the country. And each one of those food banks then works with hundreds or 1,000 community partners to distribute food and whatnot. So frankly, at the national organization, we never distributed a meal. It was all about, getting food sourced from Kroger and Costco and Walmart and other places nationally and having that distributed to the food banks. And the food banks would then distribute it to community partners and provide those services, among others. So I live in Gunnison, Colorado, population, 600. If the local university's in session, maybe more. But, the local pantry, which does all the services, gets food from the food bank in Colorado Springs, which gets food from the national organization. It's kind of how it rolls. It's an ever-changing environment. If you don't believe me, look no further than COVID. Suddenly the food banking world was rocked. We had a triple threat by COVID. First of all, we rely on volunteers at distributions and to pack food and distribute food and so forth. Guess who those volunteers are? Retired elderly. Guess who was the most at risk of COVID? Retired elderly. So suddenly the volunteer pool went out. Supply chain took, just tanked down. So we had no supplies. Our typical donors supplying food didn't have anything to supply. So we were out buying food, which is something we didn't typically do. And then you had to figure out a new way to distribute things because you couldn't do it face to face. So suddenly you saw these big lines. I don't know if you saw the news, these miles and miles of cars in Texas and other places where people would pop their trunk and volunteers, National Guard would put boxes of food in there. So, that from that environment to now, what does it look like to deliver food in a dignified way of people's choosing? So to get people what they need, when they need it, and how they would like it. And then there was definitely, we came up gritty, and, John Van Hengel is the kind of father of food banking, and he saw a mother digging through a dumpster one day and said, well, what are you doing? What's happening? And dug in, and that's how he just kind of created this notion of a food bank, St. Mary's Food Bank in Arizona. So if you think about that, just like how can we get to easy solutions, they're not always the most effective, right? So my local pantry, guess how they keep attendance today? The spiral-bound notebook that's by the front door. That's how they keep attendance. And then they keep a dashboard. It's the whiteboard next to the front door of how many families were served and so forth. So we have this variability and need for technical expertise and serving people better through that. Here were some of the key challenges that we had. For sure, you've already heard me foreshadow this a little bit. Over-reliance on personal networks. So the local pantry, this is a true story, local pantry executive director called me into the pantry and said, Tom, I'm having trouble. I know Feeding America has contracts with Safeway and with Kroger, yet when I go to our local stores to do that, the store managers or the produce managers say, we can't give you food. It's against our corporate policy. How do I do that? Like, who do I talk to? So I would have to say, well, Beth, you talk to this person that goes to this person that goes to this person, and it's like a big game of telephone, rather than, here's the agreement that I have with Safeway. Why couldn't we make that available in document repository, show that to the store manager, get best practices from around the country about how people engage with produce managers to get that produce that's about to go bad, so on and so forth. So this crazy reliance on personal networks. And remember I said, highly motivated, mission-based workers that burn out fast because of all of this inefficiency. That person leaves, and suddenly you've lost that information node to get to the information you need, and you got to figure out who has access to their hard drive or to their files, and it's a mess. So I'm being honest about it. Silos between and within the national organization and the food bank network. So each of those food banks are developing information, lessons learned, innovations. The national organization is doing the same. Not talking always with one another and duplicating and so on and so forth. Improved offboarding and knowledge transfer. So I can't tell you how many times someone would say, hey, how do I log into this system that we have to look at inventory? John knows that, but he left last month, and I don't know who's got his information or user's guide and all that kind of stuff. Definitely a need for a defined governance process. People say, well, we have SharePoint. So SharePoint became the digital dumping ground for anything that we thought might be interesting for anybody some point in time. So it became like, as one of my former bosses said, it became the place where information goes to die because you can't find it. Definitely the need for KM leadership, and rather than, we had a governance group that dealt with content, kind of like how to organize the internet, intranet, and things like that. But nobody was really dealing with strategy and thinking about what's the next step and what do we need to really fully leverage this information and lessons learned and so forth. Definitely limited ability, as you can imagine, to find people, to find information. I mean, I had people adjacent to our department with certain expertise that I was going out and consulting, like contract consulting for, when I had it in-house and didn't even know it because there was no way to search for that kind of expertise. And I only found out because I was at happy hour with their coworker having a beer, and they said, oh, John does blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, oh my God, I just spent X thousands of dollars on a consultant to do that exact thing. And then finally, this thing, and I will keep hitting this, that conflict between investing in infrastructure and funding direct services. So really having the business argument, that elevator pitch, when I got on the elevator with the CEO and could say, here's why knowledge management will make a difference for us. It's going to help us steward donor dollars. Right now, we're wasting donor dollars, multi-million dollars across the network, and I don't feel right about that. We should be more responsible. That was my pitch. It worked okay, but I think that's the part of the art in being able to navigate an organization, particularly a nonprofit organization, through this. I'm going to let Sarah talk a little bit about the efficiencies or inefficiencies.
Wonderful. Yeah, so Tom, I think, described some of the stories and the kind of real-world examples of some of the instances of these KM challenges over the course of those kind of summary challenges and the importance of ROI and business impact for nonprofits. But one thing we want to do, too, is kind of walk you through a specific example of a sample persona, someone who really is a type of role within Feeding America, and show you the kind of current state of knowledge management and information sharing for this persona as it stands now. And then we'll also show you what we put together over the course of the months we worked together in terms of a target state journey for this same persona here. So it really, I think, comes to play and comes to be a little bit more clear when you put examples in front of these challenges here. So let's put yourself in the shoes of a sample persona here that we have, a new mobile pantry coordinator. So someone who's coordinating, organizing the resources for a specific food pantry. And one thing we discovered through the course of our discovery and research and analysis work is this new coordinator, and as Tom said, there's a lot of folks who join the organization and are really excited to make an impact right away. They're mission driven, they're excited. And so this new coordinator is tasked for the first time with doing or leading a one-time event. And so their new supervisor says to them, hey, I think we've done this before in another organization or another location, but I don't know where to find that information on how that event went, what resources we have to support you. So you're kind of out of luck there. And so that mobile coordinator maybe then, takes that extra step, goes to the Feeding America's intranet, and starts navigating, browsing through it, trying to find the information they might be helpful to them in organizing this event. But they don't know where to look. There's a variety of different navigational tabs. If they're not sure, they just started, they're not sure where that information might sit. I'm sure this is a problem that isn't just unique to Feeding America here. I'm sure this is a lot of people's common challenges too. And so after sifting through that type of information for a couple of hours, maybe this person decides, I can't find what I'm looking for. Let me ask, someone else. So this new coordinator, who may not have that same extent of a personal network, kind of as Tom described, because they're new to this organization here, may turn to a tool such as Yammer, a kind of community-based forum for communication, and post a question. Hey, has anyone done this before, and where can I find key resources? This person may, wait a few hours, waiting for a response, and the next day there still is none. So this coordinator then turns to the national organization, to the Feeding America National Organization, sends an email to a resource, that email address they found online, and says, hey, can you help me? There's an event I'm sure someone else has done before. Where can I go to find this information? So now it's in the hands of the national organization, right? And so they're looking through the intranet on their own. This national staff member is talking to resources and other people within the member engagement services, and finally, after some hours, finds a piece of information, an example of a past event that they think would be helpful for this new coordinator. So sends that along their way. And so, the new mobile pantry coordinator now has, some information on an event that has been done. But you can imagine that starting off this process and launching this event, they may have some lower confidence just in their ability to really jumpstart that and get started based on the extent of time and their kind of reaction here towards the events of trying to find that information that they needed. Took, we have an example here, over the course of about 4 business days, but there's a lot of working hours of active sifting through information trying to find that. So this is, an experience we want to try to avoid. There's so many different points of contact here where the coordinator had to go to a specific intranet, had to go talk to folks on Yammer, had to go talk to an email that the person at the national organization. There's so many points that they needed to get their information, and we want to really drill that down and make that easier and more intuitive to someone who's new to the organization planning an event like this. And so I'm kind of alluding to this, but how do we make it easier for this persona here? And so this is a sample a journey map of the same persona, so our new mobile pantry coordinator, but with the vision for what KM could look like at Feeding America and what would make it easier for this person to get the information that they needed. And so we'll take the story similarly, but you'll see the kind of reduced number of steps right away from the screen here, as well as just the overall satisfaction of the persona in this instance. So, if they're given that responsibility for planning an event after being new to the organization, in this target state, in this future journey here, the coordinator is able to search in an enterprise search portal, a single source of truth for all of the organization's information, best practices, and content, and comes back with a relevant, up-to-date article describing a past experience that another food bank pantry coordinator had done in a separate location. They not only have this article, but once they find this and it comes up on search, there's actually a quick link where they're able to say who is the person who authored this or this article is relevant to, and what is their information, so I can reach out and connect to them directly. And so this mobile pantry coordinator is able to use that quick link, that direct piece of contact to reach out, set up a 30-minute conversation with someone virtually, to this other employee virtually, to learn about how the event went, what potential lessons learned this person may have, and advice for this new coordinator. So, obviously that's fewer steps. I think that's visually very clear here, but I do want to point out that it's not, obviously as simple as throwing enterprise search at the problem here. There's, a larger commitment and a larger process that we're putting in place here for a commitment to content governance and that up-to-date articles that are needed to be published in order to be, resourceful and helpful to employees in that space. So this time, really does also take into account that commitment from folks at that network and national organization to put together those relevant articles. So this is just, an example here of one of those types of personas that we looked at when we built out our roadmap for addressing and building out that future state of KM with Feeding America. So how do we get to that target state journey? What goes into that? What do we need to consider? What pieces of the puzzle do we need to build in? So I'd like to start off with talking a little bit about the strategic priorities of Feeding America and how these strategic priorities impacted the roadmap that we set out to build. So Thomas talked to these a little bit throughout the course of his slides here, so I'll keep this short. But first, of course, increasing the awareness of information and resources is a large goal, a large priority for Feeding America. So if we take in mind our mobile pantry coordinator that we walked through on previous slides, how do we make information for that persona not only accessible when they're searching for it, but also help them discover and find additional content that will help them maybe later on or down the line and isn't just what they're looking for in that current moment. Finding and connecting people at the national and network levels. Tom spoke a lot about the personal networks and the kind of ability to find information when you know someone. How do we make that not the case, where there is the ability to connect with people across departments, whether it's via an expert finder, whether it's via connecting with based on some of those articles and things that you see in that centralized portal. And finally, cultivating community-wide learning. So how do we make learning, continued learning, a consistent part of folks' experience at Feeding America? I think we all kind of know here the really intertwined nature of learning in KM, and how do we make the ability to capture tacit knowledge and to continue upskilling and learning a part of the day-to-day of folks within their roles at Feeding America. And so I want to touch a little bit on some of the key initiatives that were part of our roadmap. So what you're seeing listed across the top here are the 5 key work streams that were very relevant and instrumental to the 2-year roadmap that we built out. So I'll talk a little bit to each one, but the roadmap is quite detailed, so it's hard to kind of give you a in-depth analysis of each one here. So the first being KM governance and leadership. So trying to give people and empower them to have the roles and responsibilities and the clarity of these in order to achieve the KM mission. So how do we build out appropriately this KM org, whether it's a combination of folks who exist in various roles at the organization now, or whether that might be a hiring of an FTE. What does that look like? So that's a key piece of the puzzle. Embedded learning, I talked to quite a bit, but embedding learning in the day-to-day experience of others, making sure we capture those high-value moments within Feeding America employees' day-to-day and make those accessible to learn from. Content strategy. So we talked about content governance, about system governance. How do we make the process for those 400 plus content authors intuitive and so that there's a common maintenance and governance process in place? Search and findability. So this is really referencing some of the enabling kind of technology that we built out through the roadmap, understanding that technology really is that enabling feature. And Tom talked to this a little bit earlier, but we need to keep in mind the lower tech solutions that can be more of a short-term solution, and in hopes of pushing forward those maybe more advanced solutions in that longer term. That's a key thing we need to make sure we're keeping in mind. And lastly, interest and connection community building. So making people having the ability to connect based on common interests, common experiences, and making that intuitive to their day-to-day. So I talked about how the roadmap is quite detailed, that it's there in some capacity on the left here, but what I think is more maybe meaningful to you all is talking about some of the considerations for development of a roadmap such as this one. So something we learned quite a bit through our lessons learned is the importance of focusing on pilots, focusing on digestible value add activities that can be accomplished within a few months with one department to show the value of KM and also prove out a framework to scale. We saw the importance, I talked a little bit about leveraging existing or low-tech technology in the short term and moving towards that advanced. We really need to keep in mind how we establish and kind of create KM foundations up front in the first part of the roadmap, so you have that ability to continue forward, scale, advance in that second half. So things like that KM function, that org structure, content governance, those types of things that need to really happen up front so you can scale. And having defined roles, people involved, making sure that responsibility is clear to the people who will be taking on some of these activities. So Tom mentioned, people at Feeding America are very mission driven. They're very busy, and so wanting to make sure that this is taken into account and we're giving people the responsibility that they have the ability to take on. So Tom's speaking of pilots, going to talk a little bit to some of the pilots and how we organized them.
So I'm aware we're running short on time. I'm a talker, so that's probably on me. Before I dive into this, there's three things I'd make a point in saying. On this journey, it's easy to get trapped into the doing of the tasks. Let me do a roadmap. Let me do this. Let me do that. And every single bit of it has to do with culture. And how do I intervene with the existing culture and change the culture to be KM friendly, KM responsive? So I just encourage you to think about, one of the lessons we learned was how to embed every step into culture making, culture creating. Including, one of the things we take for granted, I think, is let me go do a focus group. Let me do some interviews. Let me dig into documents. That's an opportunity to not just get the information, but to intervene and to start to plant the seeds of that culture creation that you're trying to evoke across the organization. So I would say that was a big thing. And then here, you can call it an Eisenhower matrix or this kind of like complexity versus impact. I think balancing a quick win, as Sarah was just talking about, balancing a quick win with initiating those longer term implementations that take a long time, to have both of those going simultaneously takes some effort. This was a really great way for us just to organize. Hey, Tom, we can do 15 pilots or 21 pilots. Where would you like to start? Maybe, it would be ridiculous to do them all. So to kind of think about organizing them according to this matrix and picking some in the lower left quadrant to start with that made more sense, that could get a lot of traction and get us a lot of, talking space. And then something's longer term so that when we do build momentum, we don't want to have people wait for, 18 months before that longer implementation takes place. So hopefully that makes sense. Here, I'm going to let Sarah go through here, but I'm going to stand up here and just give a little color.
Yeah. It'll be good to double team this one. So we just want to leave you with, some of this, a summary of lessons learned of keys to success for building out your own KM programs at your organizations. And I think we've touched on some of these over the course of that presentation here, but people as a priority for nonprofits and for Feeding America specifically builds into a lot of these lessons learned here. So the first one, making sure that the KM responsibilities are built into people's existing roles where possible, and or hiring where that is possible and needed. The finding KM champions as well is a huge, area of importance, not only to find people who can encourage buy-in for some of these KM initiatives across the organization, but also be some of those people who can maybe be part of those pilot initiatives that you're launching and help, show success in those various departments and areas. And the last thing I'll say here, and then see, Tom, what color you have and want to add here, is that as you take KM, we like to call it on a roadshow across the organization to showcase the value it can bring with some of the value add endpoints from those pilot initiatives. Focus in on how KM is impacting the mission of the organization. For Feeding America specifically, it's serving more meals. How do we help people? And so being able to tell those stories and pull that thread through is going to be key to drawing out that success and getting buy-in.
Perfect. The one thing I would add is on the technology side, there's always that, we have X, technology will save us. right? We'll just input this new thing, or we'll pay for a new KM system, and that'll be the, panacea. And I think actually having the technical conversations early, but setting expectations correctly. So, being able to leverage what technologies you already have, being able to optimize those. I think, looking at our own organization, we had lots of different systems in place. None of them were fully optimized for collaboration or for sharing. So thinking about those kinds of conversations. So suddenly now, the research guys having a conversation with the CIO, having a conversation with a network officer who's responsible for the relationships of all these food banks and so forth. So it becomes a very important conversation to have.
Wonderful. Well, yeah, we're happy to answer questions here too. I'll look to kind of Sandra to give us an indication on time.
So I think, given the time is up, I don't know how many people are staying for the next one, or might need to take a break. So if you need to take a little break or take a walk, that's great. But if you don't mind indulging a
Sure,
few
yeah,
extra minutes, anyone who would like to ask a question, please do.
Yeah.
And thank you for being here, by the way. Appreciate you.
Thank you. Yes?
Food rescue apps are coming out of the woodwork,
Yeah.
at least in Canada.
Yeah, for sure.
Are you looking for any partnerships there, or is it purely a profit?
It's interesting. So our chief supply chain officer and her team are really looking at what partnerships to